Hello and welcome to another Every Tuesday tutorial. In this week's tutorial, we're going to create vector watercolor lettering. So we'll start creating watercolor lettering first, we'll scan it in, I'll share all of my scan settings, and then finally we'll vectorize it in Adobe Illustrator. I'll share my image trace settings with you, as well as a few methods that I utilize when I'm cleaning all of my lettering up and making it perfectly vectorized so it can be infinitely rescalable from there. So let's jump in with creating our watercolor lettering. So in order for us to vectorize watercolor lettering, we first need to make our watercolor lettering. So I'm going to walk you through one technique that is actually one of my favorite techniques for creating watercolor lettering. So the supplies I'm using for this watercolor lettering are these Arteza miniature brushes. These are really nice for blending really fine details, which I love because then I can get things really precise. The one that I'm using for this is the 4/0 spot brush. And then I have a paper towel for wiping off any excess paint. I've got a jar of water right here. This is an Arteza small watercolor pad. I love this. I actually watercolor a lot on the couch at night, and this is really handy. It's not so bulky and it's really easy for me to create my lettering that way. The markers that I'm using watercolor brush markers, and these are the TwiMarkers. So I've already pulled out a few colors, but I just wanted to show you the huge color variety that these come with. So pretty cool. Basically any color that you need, it's right in here. So for our base lettering, I'm using the lightest gray color right here. This is the cool gray. It's A219. So all the supplies that I'm using, there's a link right in the video description. If you want to see more of using these Arteza products, head on over to their YouTube channel. I'll leave a link in the video description for that as well. So for the base lettering, I'm using this cloudy gray brush marker. These have two tips. So you've got your brush marker tip on one end, and then you've got a fine liner on the other side. So that's really helpful, and you'll see me using both of these in this video. So for the initial lettering, I'm using the brush end just so it looks a little more calligraphic. So just write out whatever word that you want to create your watercolor lettering with. Okay, and once you have that, now we're going to start creating our different watercolor blends. So I'm going to uncap all of these just so it's really easy, because you'll see once we start working, you kind of have to work quickly. That way the pigment doesn't soak into the paper and then it's harder to blend it. So I'm going to uncap the fine liner end of each of these markers. Okay, so I'm going to start with the green and just color in this top part of my C, and then put in my mint green right here, and then my blueberry blue down here. So I've just got three colors right here, and now I want to work pretty quickly. So I'm going to dip my brush into my water and start blending the green into my mint green. And I want to make it so you can't tell where I put that splotch of mint green. So I want it to blend pretty seamlessly. And then same thing with the blue. I don't want it to be super obvious where I did the streak of blue. So blend these together. And now we're going to move into the next three colors. So I'm going to use purple right here, and then come around back to blue, and then back to my mint green here. So now that we have our watercolor lettering all set, make sure it's fully dried before you go and scan it in. So next I'm going to scan this artwork into my computer. I'll share my scan settings, and then we'll start vectorizing it in Illustrator. I am on my home printer scanner combo. I'll leave a link to it in the video description. So what you see on screen are similar options to what you should be seeing when you scan a piece of artwork on your home scanner. So what you want to make sure of, the most important parts here, is that it's a color scan. You want your resolution to be at least 300 dpi, and then you'll want the format to be JPEG. And once you have all of that, just hit scan. And from there, it's totally optional, but you could bring it into Photoshop if you're familiar with color editing. If you want to make any improvements or changes to your color, you can do it in Photoshop and then bring it into Illustrator. Otherwise, it's totally fine to just take the scan as it is and bring it into Illustrator, which is exactly what I'm going to do, so you can see what it looks like from scratch, just from a plain scan. All right, so I'm in Illustrator. I've brought in my scan, and the way that I did that is I went File, Place, and then just selected the scan and brought it in. This document is 8.5 by 11 inches, but it really doesn't matter what size, because once we vectorize this, you can rescale it to any size and you won't lose quality. I am working in an an RGB document that is 300 dpi, so it matches the resolution of our scan. So you want to select your artwork and then come up here to image trace, toggle down this little arrow right next to it and choose high fidelity photo and let it run. Okay, so this is what the initial vectorization will look like. And you can see it looks really similar to the scan, but if I zoom in here really close, you can see it's made up of all kinds of tiny shapes in different colors. And if you're happy with this, we can commit the changes. But if you want to make any adjustments before you commit those changes, what you want to do is come over here to your trace panel and just click on that, and you can get all these options. If you don't see all these options at once, just toggle down this little arrow next to advanced and you'll be able to see them all. The main things that I usually try to do is reduce my anchors and my paths as much as I can while still maintaining the quality of the artwork, because the higher count that you have on your paths and your anchors leads to a larger file size. So if file size is of concern to you, just reduce these as far as you can go while still maintaining the quality you're looking for. So one of the things that can reduce anchors and paths immediately is just by increasing your noise. So I usually bring this up to at least 10 pixels just to see how that changes everything. And if I look down here, I'm about at 18,000 anchors and 2,500 paths right now. And once this runs, we'll see what that looks like. Okay, so I didn't really notice any change in my artwork itself, the vectorization, but I did reduce my paths by almost 500 and my anchors by almost 3,000. So that's pretty significant. Your corners, this will just make the edges of these random little shapes in here. This will just make the corners a little more defined, and then your paths are how exact all of these shapes look. So I'm going to increase my corners up to 55% and then just reduce my paths down to 40%. This is typically the settings that I like to start with, and if I want to make any adjustments from there, then I'll tweak these settings. But these are the initial ones that I work with. Obviously, they'll be different for whatever artwork you have, so just feel free to change these at will, but I wanted to share at least my starting point with everything. Okay, so this is looking pretty good to me and I'm ready to go. So I'm going to commit these changes. I'm going to close out of my panel and hit expand. And once you hit expand, that commits those changes. You will no longer be able to go into the trace panel to change anything. So just be aware of that. So I'm going to hit expand. And once I do that, you can see we've got all these shapes all outlined now, so we can see where they all are. So even though we can see all of these individual shapes, they're all grouped together, and we need to ungroup them because we want to remove all of the watercolor paper behind our lettering so our lettering can just float on its own. And in order to do that, you can hit Command-Shift-G on a Mac or Control-Shift-G on a PC, and now everything's ungrouped. I can select all of these little elements separately and independent of each other. So now we need to work to clean everything up so we only have color showing and none of these weird white pieces showing up from our watercolor background. So a lot of people don't realize when you use the magic wand tool, if I hit Y on my keyboard, I get my magic wand tool. And by default, the magic wand is set to a tolerance of 32. So if I select just the white and I only want the white selected, so I can select it and then hit delete, you can see it removes a lot of the parts of my lettering that I need to keep. So it's just selecting too much. And many people don't realize that you can adjust that default tolerance setting. So I want to show you how to do that. And I also want to show you how to keep track of what you need to clean up and what you don't need to touch. So I'm going to undo that. And first I'm going to set in a background color of black behind my lettering. That way I can keep track of everything. And I want to do this on a new layer. So I'm going to come into my layer palette and I'm just going to create a new layer. So hit this little icon down here and I'm going to drag this underneath my layer 1 so it's at the very bottom. I'm going to hit M on my keyboard for my rectangle tool and then just draw a big box behind it and color that black. Okay, and now I don't want this black shape to move at all, so I'm going to lock that layer and then return to layer 1. Now I'm going to grab my magic wand tool, hit Y on your keyboard, and you can see it over here in your toolbox. And in order to adjust the tolerance level, double click on the magic wand. And now you can see we've got our tolerance right here, and we can reduce this so there's fewer pieces selected that are similar in color whenever you select something with the magic wand. So if I bring this down to 20%, we can see how much gets selected. So I'm just going to select the white and then hit delete. And that's a lot better, but it's still eating into a lot of the parts of my letters. So I'm going to undo that, Command-Z or Control-Z on a PC. So I know I need to reduce this even more. So I'm going to come down to 10 and let's see what happens now. I'm going to click into my white and then hit delete, and that looks much better. Now I don't have quite as much to worry about when I clean up the rest of my edges. So we're going to stick with that. I can close this panel now, and now we're going to just start selecting shapes and deleting them. So I'm going to hit V on my keyboard for just my regular selection tool, and I can come into the edges, and I'm just going to grab my shapes and hit delete, and get rid of any extra white pieces that you don't want. If you want kind of a halo around your lettering, maybe you want to leave some of these white pieces. For me, I'm going to get rid of them. And you can see our edges are still a little jagged in areas. It may look more authentic to leave it if you want it a little smoother. I'm going to show you my method for making those edges smoother after these edges are cleaned up. So I'm going to speed up the video, and then I'll be back once I've gotten rid of any of these pieces that I don't want here. Okay, so I've cleaned up all the edges as far as I feel comfortable right now, and I've noticed that there are definitely some areas that I want to clean up and just make a little bit smoother. If I come into the C in particular, you can see some of these shapes. When it automated the vectorization, I'm left with little gaps here and there, and most people wouldn't notice it. Does it really matter? It really depends on how large this would ever be used at, where maybe it wouldn't even be noticeable if it were used at a really small size. But I'm going to show you how I would fix this. So I find a neighboring shape like this one, and I just grab my pencil tool, so I'll hit N on my keyboard, and I'll just extend the shape using my pencil tool, and because I'm using my pencil tool, it looks more hand-drawn. You just want to make sure that you begin and end on the same path. Otherwise, you'll get some stray shapes that won't fully connect. So for this one, I can grab this shape and then just hit N, follow the same path. You want to start and end along the same path, and that will connect it. You can also just use your direct select tool and adjust the points. I'll show you what that looks like as well. Here's another one up here. So I'm going to grab the shape, and I can hit A on my keyboard for my direct select tool. Just grab the point and move it. So there are two really easy ways to adjust your shapes. And the same thing goes for the edges. Like maybe this edge just feels a little too rough for me for watercolor. I can use my pencil tool and just extend the shape down, or I can move those points with the direct select tool too and just make the shape a little bit larger. And because I've got all these different shapes that are different sizes, it won't be noticeable when you go and adjust or change the shape of any of these. So this one, if I want to just make this one a little bit of a smoother edge, I can do that. Same thing down here. Maybe I don't even need this point, so I can just delete it with my delete anchor point tool, and I can do the same thing here and then just adjust my points. Since this is watercolor, you really don't need to go into all of the edges and change all of the edges to be super smooth. Unless that's something that you're going for, you really don't need to do that, because from far away, we want it to read as watercolor. And if the edges are really, really smooth, it may not visually look like watercolor because it's a little too perfect then. But it really depends on the aesthetic that you're going for. So you can come around all of your different letters and just make those improvements. And now we definitely have Vectorize watercolor lettering. And if you ever wonder if something is vectorized or not, all you have to do is go into outline mode. You can do that by hitting Command Y or Control Y on a PC, and you can see all those little shapes. If it's not vectorized, all you're going to see is a bounding box, a rectangle with a big X in the middle. So we do not see that here. We see a bunch of shapes, so that tells us that this is vectorized lettering. And the great benefit of vectorizing your lettering is if you ever want to put this on a billboard, you can resize this as large or as small as you want, and the quality will never ever be lost. That is the biggest benefit of vectorizing any of your work, and it's totally possible with watercolor. It just takes a little bit of extra effort improving some of these areas because the image trace isn't perfect, but it gets us really far in the process by changing everything into all these different shapes and colors. So that is how to create vectorized watercolor lettering from beginning to end. Once again, all the supplies are right in the video description, so just click into there and you can have access to everything. If you enjoyed enjoyed this tutorial, please hit the like button, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell icon so you can be notified of new tutorials just like this one in the future. For more design and lettering tutorials and freebies, head on over to my site, every-tuesday.com. You can also find me over on Instagram. My handle is everytuesday. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next week.